Hello everyone, this is Nick, and yes, it's finally time to have a look at these points from X-Wing Wave 3. Sorry for the delay, I was actually just quite busy apart from all my YouTubing stuff, so I finally have a chance to sit down and go through all of this and have a general chat about what impact I think this is going to have on meta play. And today I'm going to do the Separatists. Now, there's no reason why I've done the Separatists or the Republic first. I think there's a lot to talk about in both factions. I'm not more or less hyped about either one. Just to get that out of the way first, I'm very curious about flying both factions. I do plan on flying both factions myself, and yeah, they represent something very unique, especially when it comes to hyperspace. So it'd be very cool to see what actually impact we have with this stuff on the table. But without further ado, let's dive down this, have a look at this document that FFG have produced and just talk about it ship by ship, upgrade by upgrade. Starting with the Blob 22 Starfighter, the points range from 37 points with the Theathan Outlaw Autopilot up to 47 points with General Grievous. Which doesn't look like a huge point span, but you do have to appreciate that General Grievous is only Initiative 4, so 10 points from the Initiative 1 to 4, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It is also worth pointing out that the Theathan Outlaw Autopilot has a Calculate, which I know in a vacuum makes it worse than a pilot that just has a focus, but considering it can be flown alongside Vulture droids and all that kind of stuff, it actually has, on this faction, more value than a pilot that would have focus, which actually makes it quite decent. Now, in terms of comparing this ship to things that already exists and sort of trying to balance what FFG have done with the points here, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is the closest to an X-Wing in terms of its stats. I'm talking about the T-65. Now, the T-65 has one more hull. Its dial is a bit different, a bit slower overall. Yeah, I know the Blob has red hard turns at 3, but it's got S loops. It's really hard to say that one dial is strictly better than one or the other. And the stats are so close, and they've both got boosts and barrel rolls, I know situationally, and there are some red-linked actions associated with those. But it's pretty safe to say that these ships are pretty close in terms of power level. And you have to appreciate the fact that the cheapest X-Wing, what have we got here, is 41 points with the Blue Squadron Escort. And the cheapest Blob is 37 points, a full 4 points cheaper. Which is cool. I think, you know, the clear thing we can look at with these platforms is, yes, the X-Wing has things like the Astromech, one extra hull, so it's probably a little bit better, which is where that 4 points exists, which seems fair to me. I look at these two platforms and I think the costing is fair on both. It is worth saying that, yes, the X-Wing is seeing a decent amount of meta play, but that's mainly because of Luke and Wedge, and the Blob does not have an Initiative 5 or 6 pilot. Having said that, I am very curious about what General Grievous can do. I'm hearing excellent things from the people that have flown him. Seems like a really cool ability. It's one of those Initiative 4 pilots with a ability which would be really, really powerful on Initiative 5 or 6, but they sort of temper the power level and basically turn it into this brawler, which is designed to fly before the aces, but has a lot of upside when you have very key positioning achieved. And at 47 points, everything feels very, very solid. In fact, I have to say, overall, looking at the different point values on this platform, it all seems fair. Nothing really jumps out at me as being really pushed, but I think that's okay. I think this platform will deliver. Let's move over to the Sith Infiltrator, our cheapest pilot being Dark Courier at 53 points. And our most expensive at 65. It is also worth pointing out that Dark Courier is not a droid, does not have a calculate token, and 066 does. So you still have to invest points in order to get that calculate action, which again, I know in a vacuum is worse than a focus, but more valuable on this faction in particular. But for only 2 points, I think most of the time you would consider that. An increase in initiative by 1, a pilot ability which might come up every now and then, might help you hit a bit harder. Honestly, I don't think you're investing in 066 because of that pilot ability. You're investing in 066 because this pilot has a calculate. And at only 2 points, it feels like if you were going to take the Sith Infiltrator anyway because you need it for like a tactical relay or a probe droid, it feels like an okay option, and there's a decent jump between 066 and the Force users, as you'd expect.
For a further 6 points, you can get access to Count Dooku. Oh, now one thing I did want to talk about here. I did mention when I was speculating on these pilots that Count Dooku might actually end up being the most expensive because of all the text on Count Dooku. I seriously still think that this pilot is something to be reckoned with. It may actually end up seeing more meta play than Darth Maul. We'll see. It's only 4 more points for Darth Maul, and people might just gravitate towards that because of initiative. But Count Dooku, with the way he works with Scimitar and all that kind of thing, I'm very, very curious about that. And indeed, it's only 4 points different. I can very easily see a world where if it turns out Count Dooku is seeing more meta play, he may actually become more expensive than Darth Maul. 61 points, 65 points, feels pretty fair to me. It doesn't feel like there's a tax for this being on a large base ship, which there absolutely should not be in 2nd edition. If anything, being on a large base ship's actually a worse thing now. So, yeah, that seems to be a good thing. Darth Maul having that ability to shoot things twice is very, very deadly. Nothing here jumps off the page at me of being really pushed in either direction. What is a point of interest on the Sith Infiltrator, though, is we have a few upgrade slots that we weren't sure it was going to get. Torpedoes and 2 crews, not just 1. Now, we knew about the Force, the cannon, the tack relay, the bomb, the title, the modification. No surprises there, but torpedoes is not uninteresting if we take a quick look at Darth Maul. After you perform attack, you may spend a force to perform a bonus primary attack. So that first attack could be proton torpedoes. That's an option. That first attack also could be a cannon, but I don't know. It feels like a very big investment to get not a whole heap of payoff. You got to remember, fundamentally, if you're going to attack twice with a 3 red dice primary, you're already winning at that stage. You don't really need to be adding in proton torpedoes to make that competitive. That's already really, really powerful. But yes, another really clearly defined points range. In fact, if you have a look at all the points range, there is absolutely zero overlap on this faction. In fact, if we go into the Vulture Droid, yes, it is way cheaper. Even the most expensive pilot is way cheaper than the cheapest pilot in the Blob. And yes, this is the one I was the most keen to talk about because it has the biggest implication on list building. We were pretty confident that the Vulture at the cheapest point was going to be cheaper than an Academy pilot on the TIE Fighter. It was just a question of how much cheaper, and every single point counts. I cannot stress that enough. And we got it all the way down to the sweet spot of 20 points with the Trade Federation drone. Now, do bear in mind, guys, there is in X-Wing a hard cap on the amount of ships you can fly. You cannot just drop 10 of these on the table. There is a hard cap of 8 ships, which I think was part of the design, knowing that the Vulture Droids were coming along. In fact, you can see in the early days of 2nd edition, with the design of the rules and everything that came out in Wave 1, it does seem like FFG were aware of the implication of the Clone Wars coming into it. It was clearly planned well in advance. I made the comment a while ago, I didn't think the Clone Wars was coming to X-Wing because back then we had 1st edition and it would have made the game way more complex and cumbersome as it is. Part of the design of having a 2nd edition of the game means that this kind of thing is possible. And yes, the hard cap on ships is probably a good thing for that reason. However, having said that, you can slap the energy shells on 8 of these if you really, really wanted to, if that's something you want to try and do. We'll talk more about that when we get to the energy shells and the upgrades down the bottom in a tick. As for these points range, yeah, there is basically no discernible tax for flying these things. You just got to remember, you've got to be really careful when stacking points on these. I'm actually quite surprised to see these guys have a modification slot. I would strongly advise, unless there's a combo I'm missing here, I would strongly advise against putting any modifications on these guys for just about any reason. Maybe afterburners on the Precise Hunters. I'm very trepidatious about recommending that. No hull upgrades. Keep hull upgrade well away from this ship. It's way too expensive. It's going to bloat the platform way too much. Keep this thing cheap and it will do well for you. And also bear in mind, the highest initiative we have on these guys is initiative 3. Unless you're fighting against another Vulture Swarm, I can't see a realistic scenario where you're going to be shooting first a consistent amount of time in the tournament. So bear in mind, on a pretty consistent level, they're going to have to suffer attacks and potentially suffer damage before getting to shoot first, so they can just pop. And it really does put a really hard tax on any point investment above that 20 points. We have DFS 081, for example, as the most expensive pilot, initiative 3. While on a friendly ship at range 0 to 1 defense, it may spend 1 calculate token to change all crit to hit results. And that's decent because it actually gives you a defensive buff, and I think that's the main reason why it's the most expensive ship. An extra 7 points to only go up by 2 initiative, but it's something that's so important. Remember, this faction is all about incremental buffs across the different pilot ability, tack relays, and this kind of stuff. And DFS 081, I think 7 points is correct on that. I think that's a good call. Now, just having a quick look at the other unique pilot, DFS 311 at Initiative 1. This is another one I'm very keenly interested in. And considering the investment's only 4 points, I think this is really solid. And considering also that the energy shell charges is also very cheap, very curious about this one. At the start of the engagement phase, you may transfer one of your calculate tokens to another friendly ship at range 0 to 3. 0 to 3 is really good. You can basically break off formation, have one of your vultures firing at one ship and another one firing at the back of it, and you can pass a calculate token pretty consistently to the one behind it, which is very important. And there is a lot of upside for calculate tokens. Vulture droids can share them around. They allow you to fire energy shell charges. By the way, if I mention energy shell charges over and over again in this video, is because I seriously think this is a card to watch out for. Apart from that, everything's pretty solid here. We have no talents. I think that is a key thing about ships that are droids. In fact, it would not surprise me if other droid ships that come out later on have this same effect. The Tri-Fighters and the Gunships, I believe, are both droids. We have Hyena Bombers coming in Wave 4. Pretty confident that none of those guys will have talents for that reason. But that's okay, because the way that these guys are powered up is through the named unique pilots, through the tactical relays. It's almost like they have to look into different places to get their power level up, and that's actually a good thing. It's actually part of the design of this faction. The Vulture Droid is aggressively costed, and I think that's a really good thing. I think it's going to be a key player on this faction. You just have to be so careful about the fact that they will just pop, and you have to build your list with that in mind all the time. Okay, let's move down to the upgrades and have a quick chat about these. Just the one configuration, the Grappling Struts and the Vultures. Now, I'm surprised that this actually cost any points at all, but I think the key reason it does cost 3 points is because FFG wanted to make sure they can get the Vultures all the way down to 20 points. And from that point of view, I think this makes sense. I mean, yes, obviously, from a lore point of view, all Vulture droids have grappling struts. But from a gameplay point of view, remember, we've got to try and satisfy both of those beasts as best as possible. I think 3 points makes sense. If you take the Trade Federation drone and give it the grappling struts, it's the same cost as an Academy pilot. So you're basically trading off a green dice and an evade action for the ability to latch onto rocks. And I think, in terms of what this does, it's going to be a very spiky and splashy effect. I don't know about tournament play. I'm hesitant to say it's trash because, let's face it, it's such a new, unique effect in the game. We're just going to have to wait and see on the meta results as to this, where this is going to take over. The fact that you can keep a ship just on a rock and turning and facing and just shooting your opponent, it seems like it could be really powerful. I think the floor on this is really low, like it'll do nothing and basically make your Vulture Droid too expensive. And the ceiling is you're going to get shots on your opponent over and over again, and it's going to be really powerful. It almost feels like it's one of those effects for the Vulture Droids that forces your opponent not to ignore that Vulture Droid, but because there's so many effects like that on the Separatist, that actually feels like a decent strategy. So yes, I'm not convinced. honestly, with my early speculation on the faction, I'm not really looking at Grappling Struts as a competitive option, but I'm happy to wait and see. It's one of those things which is so different to anything else we've already had, I'm not going to say it's bad just yet. Okay, over to the crew. Count Dooku, 9 points. That's very competitively costed. Considering he's sort of a quasi-palp, it's very difficult to sort of decide where Count Dooku's at. He's kind of like the fixed version of Palp from first edition, where you have to announce what's going on first and change the dice after they're rolled, so you don't get the prior information of all the dice. You have to sort of guess what's going to happen. But it also works on your opponent's dice. It also has a range restriction, so it's very difficult to just do that straight comparison to the old version of Palp. Having said that, 9 points feels like it's definitely cheap enough to just take speculatively and just really experiment with, because even for 9 points, we know that that old version of Palp, just buffing your own ships, is decent. It means you can consistently get crits on the Sith Infiltrator, which is the only platform he can go on right now. So I think we're going to see a lot of him early on. It'll have to just wait and see what happens with the meta for this to see consistent play. I'm not completely sold on it. I think there are so many sort of limiters built into the card. But for 9 points, yeah, it's definitely worth playing around with. Chancellor Palpatine and Darth Sidious at 14 points feels about right to me. This card is very, very powerful. It's potentially more powerful than Emperor Palpatine on the Empire. It's a bit hard to say for sure. It has a very interesting combo on the Republic with Anakin Skywalker. In terms of what it does on the Separatists, you can only put it on Sith Infiltrators, and that sort of ability to recharge Force tokens only works on other Sith Infiltrators. So if there's like a dual Sith Infiltrator build going around, that could be a possibility. What if you chuck a couple of those guys on? You could definitely still get a couple of Vulture Droids in the list. The Sith Infiltrator isn't super, super expensive. It's not like half of your list sort of territory, so it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't really know what to make of that. I really am keen to fly over this with the Republic, but on the Separatists, don't know. It has the big ship issue. I think that's the biggest thing potentially holding this card back. Now, General Grievous for 3 points. Okay, this feels really, really pushed. I made the comment when I first saw this card, if it sits around that sort of 2, 3, 4 point mark, it's going to be competitive and meta-worthy. It's sort of when it gets sort of above 5 points where you really have to sort of temper your expectations of this card. But for 3 points, you're pretty consistently, I think, going to be able to cancel a result. The fact that you can also choose crit results is really good. It's versatile. The Sith Infiltrator is going to want an effect like this. And there's not much to say about this. I like it. Interesting point. When I made the comment about this originally, someone commented, and I'm sorry, I haven't saved the name, so I can't say who that was, that it's basically a hull upgrade, and if you sort of cost it effectively like that, that is sort of how you could look at it fairly. I don't fully agree because hull upgrades don't have that same interaction with hit and crit like this one does. Plus, hull upgrade is 1 point of damage full stop. It doesn't need to see 2 hit results on an opponent's dice, which I know is probably going to happen across every game, but that does make hull upgrade in that regard slightly better. But it's sort of better and worse than hull upgrade. I don't think there's a clear comparison between these cards. But I will say, I think for 3 points, General Grievous is probably more consistent overall. Oh, also, it's a crew. That's a key difference. Modification is a way less valuable slot than crew. So that means General Grievous is a little bit less powerful overall. I know I'm making all these weird comparisons. I don't think these two cards are really comparable. But yeah, definitely worth having a look at. And considering the Sith Infiltrator has 2 crew slots, I can't really see too many builds that aren't going to run him. Just seems like a really decent card. Okay, moving on to the DRK-1 Probe Droids at 6 points. And my feelings on this is it's another really sort of janky, sort of remote card that the Separatists are using, and I'm happy to wait and see, but I'm pretty confident in saying that these things are not going to perform consistently enough for meta play. And at 6 points, I think it's a really, really cool effect. And unless there's a really powerful way to abuse target locks, and look, the most consistent ordnance on this faction is going to be energy shells. and probably not proton torpedoes, although the Sith Infiltrator can take it, so I don't know, maybe on a dual Sith Infiltrator list, maybe with proton torpedoes. But I just don't think it provides enough upside. You need to do a lot of hard work and perform a lot of setup to get the value out of this card. It's very cool. Look, the ceiling on this is very, very high, but I just feel like for 6 points, it's sort of asking a bit too much for consistent play. Really cool idea for a card. It might just be one of those things where we get through, the couple of seasons of hyperspace trials before the points change again. And FFG go, right, yep, seems like it's pretty safe. Let's dunk it down to like 2 or 3 points. And we'll wait and see. I'm just not convinced right now. Okay, moving over to the missiles, and this is basically where the spice is right now. I'll just skip over the Discord missiles for 1 second because I really want to talk about energy shells. 4 points. Yes. That is cheap enough to spam on vultures. That base level platform, the Trade Federation drones with energy shells, you can put 8 of those on a table. Now, I don't think that's what you want to do necessarily, but that is an option. Alongside the named pilot, the DFS, whatever it is that passes off calculate tokens. With the tactical relays that help alongside this, I think this is a seriously, I don't want to say overly pushed, because the platform it has to go on pops without a moment's notice, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's so cheap. But I am so keen to build with this one. This is one of the key things with the Separatists I'm looking at. It basically upgrades the base level attack on the vultures. They don't have to get target locks, they don't have to get into range, so initiative is not an issue with energy shell charges. The fact of the matter is they already have good consistent ways of passing around calculate tokens, so it's going to be very easy to work with. It has the inbuilt reload. A lot about this card gets me very, very interested, and I think it's not as good as just giving a vulture 3 red dice primary. I understand that, I'm not saying it is. But I think the better players will get a lot of value out of this, and the downside of having to reload and pass around calculate tokens will not be such downsides with a bit of practice. And yes, seriously keeping an eye on this one. I think you guys should too. Now, the Discord missile at 6 points, yeah, it's cool. I'm curious about this. I know a lot of people are playing around with this. Sort of the wave release parties we're seeing at the moment, a lot of people are playing with it because it's such a fun, spiky effect. I just think for 6 points, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. The thing about the Discord missiles is it does not cost an action, or rather, it doesn't even cost an attack, like most missiles do. And that's probably the reason why it's not cheaper than it is. I really think with all the hoops you have to jump through to make this work consistently, people are going to learn how to outfly this, and it's just not going to have the meta impact. I will say, though, that yes, you can just put it on a vulture and they're not losing their attacks. I understand that. But then again, vultures can take energy shells, and I am so jazzed for energy shells. Look, I think this is going to be fun. I think maybe if the hyena bombers have multiple missiles, it'll be worth chucking 1 or 2 in a list. I know a lot of people are concerned because you can only get this in the separate vulture pack, and that kind of sucks because you have to buy the extra vulture packs to get 3 of them. I honestly don't think 3 of them in a list is going to be that competitive. Look, had to be proven wrong there. I just think there's too many hoops to jump through to get this thing to work, and your opponent has too much agency to get around it. If they have a good dial and barrel rolls and all that kind of stuff, your opponent can shake these off pretty consistently, and it's got to survive until the end of combat and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of caveats and asterisks on this card. I think people are missing, and I think it's going to be fun, but I don't think it's going to, rock hyperspace or something like that. Okay, moving down, we have one modification. That's the Impervium plating on the Blob, and this allows you to negate face-up damage cards. It's very, very interesting. The Blob only has 3 hull, but it can get 2 more with the title, so that makes this a bit more valuable. For 6 points, I mean, my biggest concern with this is your opponent just might not be relying on giving you face-up damage cards. They might just be giving you regular hits, in which case this feels pretty bad for 6 points. I don't know. And the fact it doesn't do it to every single one, it only has 2 charges. I mean, yes, I know the chances of getting more than 2 face-up damage cards are very slim, so it's basically unlimited in terms of its power level. It wouldn't be much more powerful if it was unlimited. but I kind of wish it was. I don't know, any of you guys done a bit more testing with the Blob than me? Let me know in the comment section if this is just amazing and it's just the right spice that General Grievous needs. I do understand that General Grievous does need to be able to take a hit, and it does help that he has more defensive abilities, and I think that's the key place that you'd put this. I just don't know if we really want to stack that many points on General Grievous. Okay, moving down to the tactical relays, and we have 5 points across the board apart from Kraken, and I think this feels about right. It's actually very hard to say what this upgrade slot could cost because it's completely unique. It's clearly meant to be a very high-powered upgrade slot, but I think the faction is going to rely on it very heavily as well. And from that point of view, maybe FFG wanted to cost it a bit cheaper, so it could be consistently fielded. Making sure you have a Blob with attack relay alongside vultures might just be something that you cannot ignore. Now, the most expensive here, Kraken. What does Kraken say? During the end phase, you may choose up to 3 friendly ships at range 0 to 3. If you do, those ships does not remove 1 calculate token. Yeah, given the agency of what calculate tokens can do, this is fair enough. It helps with missiles, it helps with their baked-in ability, it helps full stop. I mean, just keeping calculate tokens is fantastic. It means they get to have 2 calculate tokens the next turn if they want to do that, which again is basically good with any kind of tactic if they're shooting and defending, if they're firing missiles. To me, it makes perfect sense that Kraken is that expensive. TV94 helping you out with bullseye firing arcs is going to be very helpful against those precise hunters, but the precise hunters are already quite an investment as is, so it makes sense that TV94 is not too expensive. Also K2B4, while a friendly ship at range 0 to 3 defends, it may spend 1 calculate token to add an evade result to the roll unless the attacker gains a strain token. I'm actually also quite curious to fly this alongside energy shells, because giving your opponent strain tokens when you can hammer them with red dice feels very good. Now, strain tokens are not as powerful as tractor tokens. They go away after 1 defense as opposed to debuffing a ship for an entire round. But I still think this has value, and basically it forces your opponent to take more damage if they really want to make sure that your vultures pop. So it seems decent. There's none of these tactical relays that I think is seriously under or overpowered. Definitely makes sense that Kraken's 10 points. I'm not going to question that for a second. And yeah, it seems really good. Seems really, really good indeed. Now, Treacherous at 3 points. Now that feels fair, but we do now have to appreciate the fact that it can't go in Vulture Droids. So the power level of this is quite tempered. I think, consistently we're looking at this on Blobs more than anything else. And that feels just okay. I suppose the Blob does not really feel like a commander transport like, your Lambda class shuttle on the Empire or something like that. You're going to want to use it to actually fight with. So to have this kind of effect is very, very useful, and flying your Blob in cohesion with your vultures is very, very important. Now, I made the comment before that High-End Bombers probably not going to have talents as well as the vultures, and if that's true, then yes. Unfortunately, there's not as many platforms for this. I think one of the key things with these adjective talents, like fanatical and heroic and all those things on the various factions, is they do go on the core ships and they are sort of used quite heavily. The fact that this can't go on vultures does bother me slightly, but not a huge amount. I will say the vultures do look elsewhere apart from talents to get their power, so maybe FFG tested the vultures with talent and just found it was a little bit too much spice, a little bit too much secret sauce to make them powerful. And I don't think they need it. I think they've got a lot of stuff going for them apart from that. Okay, last but not least, we have a couple of titles. Scimitar at 4 points is dirt cheap. Yeah, wow. The fact that it gives a jam for 4 points, that'd be worth it alone, I think, to be honest. But Red Cloak, being able to set up Cloaked, and also being able to give your opponent's ship jam token another way. By the way, the Bullseye Arc ability does not say perform a jam action. So you can do that as well as performing a jam action, which means you can do a lot of work. Yeah, 4 points feels really, really pushed. And yes, it is worth pointing out that there's a possibility that this was factored into the cost of the platform, so the platform may have been cheaper if it didn't have access to this. And maybe at the end of the day, cloaking and jamming is not really that powerful on the Sith Infiltrator. But personally, I can't see how it's not. Jamming alone, yeah, I'm really looking at this for its ability to jam. Cloaking is going to be cool, especially with Count Dooku. I think that's going to be very powerful. Yeah, look, bottom line, this feels really, really pushed, and yes, it's on a large base ship, and maybe that's factored into the cost as well, and large base ship bad, blah, 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 we know that already. Yeah, really looking at this card, this is going to be really, really cool. And last but not least, we have Soulless One. While you defend, if the attacker is outside your firing arc, you may reroll one defense die. Since I spoke about this originally, a lot of people have pointed out the kind of tactics that people are going for with General Grievous, the ability to sort of charge in and outmaneuver another ship and then charge away as they're trying to turn at you, which is kind of cool. I like that sort of unique take on a pilot that can do that kind of thing. And Soulless One seems very, very decent. Adding more hull is very, very important. For 10 points, I think that's probably fair enough. It does feel expensive, and I feel like it would be better if this platform could get access to that hull for cheaper, but given that, yes, it also helps you reroll defense die, it's going to be something that makes General Grievous very, very cheeky and very mean and all that kind of stuff, and he can fly away and just avoid getting shot and that kind of thing. I'm very curious about General Grievous. I like that they gave him the pushes they did on Initiative 4 pilots. Soulless One does push his points up quite a lot, but I think it is going to be worth it. I'm definitely more interested in Soulless One than Impervium plating, that's for sure. I don't think you really want to invest the full 16 points to get both, but 10 points for Soulless One, yeah, I feel that's about right. Need to do a bit more experimenting. General Grievous is a very unique sort of asset in the game of X-Wing. We don't really have anything like this pilot ability just yet, apart from sort of, Graz on the Scum faction, but Graz doesn't see play, so who knows. I think General Grievous is definitely more interesting than Graz, and yeah, I like the approach with this. And I like the approach with all of this, like, with the Separatist, nothing really jumps out of the page. I think the key things we're looking at here in terms of really push power level is the Grievous crew card, the points cost of the buy-in for the Vulture Droid, and the energy shell charges. Those three ones are things I'm very much looking at as ways to sort of supercharge this faction, and yeah, can't wait to fly them. I think hyperspace is going to be a really fun format with these guys in the mix. Alright, anyway guys, stay tuned. Next video is going to be on these Republic points. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon, and thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. I'll catch you guys in the next video.